Exodus chapter 12 tonight. Exodus chapter 12. Before we dig in, just wanted to touch on a question that came up last week, and that was considering the firstborn that were to be put to death in Egypt, did this include firstborn females? And digging in a little bit, while we don't have explicit uh, words here that say this is the male gender, I believe it is implied and understood, considering the way that they conducted things in their Eastern culture, that the firstborn was the firstborn son. Even if a daughter was born before him, he was considered firstborn because the leadership of the patriarch would be passed over to him. He would become the patriarch of the family, and then he would take on that leadership role. He would be responsible for more of an inheritance than the rest of the children, and he also sometimes that led into, especially before the time of Moses, the law of Moses, that would come. There would be priestly duties that would come along with that under the patriarchal system, where the patriarch of the family would offer sacrifices. You see that with Abraham. You see that with Job. On behalf of the entire family, they would offer sacrifices. Now, obviously, once the law of Moses is given, God has given a particular tribe to be the priest. So, but to answer that question as to would this firstborn include females, I believe that it would primarily be sons. That, but that being said, this is still a travesty for the Egyptians. Um, I I don't even know where to begin as far as the number of deaths that would have taken place on that night. And but God indicates back in chapter 11 that there would be a great cry on this night in Egypt. And it's important for us to visit that and revisit that and remember the weight of what is happening here. And it's important to go back and see that God has given Pharaoh time and time and time and again opportunity and shown him evidence of who Jehovah is and that this is what you need to do. And Pharaoh has continued to harden his heart. And so God is executing judgment and justice or judgment against the Egyptians, and he's going to deliver his people out of their hand as he has promised that he would do. He says in um, also in chapter 11, there is going to be a difference, a separation between the Egyptians and the Israelites, as he has shown us from I believe, the fourth plague onward, that these plagues have not affected the Israelites, that they have not touched them or hurt them in any way. And this is going to be the same with the 10th one. He says, there shall not be a dog move his tongue against any of the children of Israel, indicating that they are not going to be harmed whatsoever. And so you come into chapter 12, where record is given how that God is going to give the Israelites now specific instruction of how they're going to go about preparing for and carrying out uh, this occasion that would become known to them from now on as the Passover, and signifying that God passed over them on that night, and when he brought death to all the firstborn in every house in Egypt on that night, he passed over the Israelites. He delivered them from his wrath on that night. But there was a requirement, and very specific requirement, that had to be done on their part, the Israelites' part. But here in chapter 12, beginning with verse 1, the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, this month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. So here you have God even setting in place a calendar. He's setting in place an order. Um, you could really go down a rabbit hole looking at the different calendar systems that various nations have had throughout history. However, this is what God has set in order for Israel, and it's connects back to what He has set in order from creation, because they have a 7 day week, and that seventh day for under the law of Moses was a special day. It was a day that they were to keep holy once they were given the law of Moses. And so he's establishing a calendar with them and something for them to guide them, and so that they could keep up with it. And this is going to be a yearly memorial that they're going to look back to every year. And so he's giving them the starting point. Who knows what the name of this month would have been? Or can you recall? Abib, Abib, sometimes Aviv, Aviv. Um, in Exodus 13 and verse 4, when he's looking back on this, he notes that it is that month, and he calls it by the name. This day came ye out in the month Abib, or Aviv. Then he says, Speak you unto all the congregation of Israel, saying, In the 10th day of this month they shall take to them every man a lamb according to the house of their fathers, a lamb for an house. So now, interestingly, just a little bit of a side note and something you could look into is that this is the first time that God is going to use the word congregation. The word translated congregation here in the Hebrew is Ada or Adah, and he's going to use another word that's translated as assembly, kahal, in verse 6. You shall keep it up unto the 14th day of the same month, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening. Now, interestingly, many years later, around 250 BC, when Greek had become a world-renowned language, and there were 70 that were chosen out to translate the Hebrew Bible into the Greek. They translated the word here in verse 3 for congregation as the word that they would use, synagogue, from which we get our word synagogue. And then the word for assembly would be the same word as now, actually, in the Greek, they had a different word here. In some places, it would be the ecclesia. Now, maybe forgetting the details exactly on that, but that's all right. That won't get you anything. Even if you had $1, you still can't afford a cup of coffee. But then he says, if the household be too little for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next unto his house take it according to the number of the souls. Every man according to his eating shall make you count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. You shall take it out from the sheep or from the goats. As you begin reading these instructions, what are some things that strike you as interesting, or things that come to your mind? Very good. The order and the specificity that God uses, the pattern that He's setting in place, is something that stands out to me as well. He's very detailed. He says, okay, this is the first month, and on the 10th day of this month, you're going to go out and select a lamb. And He gives them the prescription for for each house according to their fathers. Um, and then he says, if the house is too small, then share it with another smaller house, which not only would that be something that would be efficient, but in my mind, it would also be something that would be compassionate, because if you have a smaller household, you may not have the wherewithal to have access to the same animals that maybe a larger house may have. So something that comes to my mind also is God's compassion throughout all of this as well. What other thoughts? Yes, sir. That's right. That's right. Um, it wasn't certainly wasn't a what's it? What are those things you call you pop in the microwave? Work a what? A hot pocket or just a TV dinner? That and we may not call them that anymore, but that's the terminology I'm trying to think of. Certainly wasn't a TV dinner occasion, and as Brother Billy noted, it took a great deal of preparation. That they had to go out and select the lamb, and then you have from day 10 to day 14. There's obviously some things taking place in those days. While it's not all laid out for us specifically what is done, that's the day that God specifies. On the 14th day, the whole congregation is going to slaughter their lamb on that day. Your lamb shall be without blemish, which is a very important detail that he gives. And so this, as Brother Billy noted, this is not something that's haphazardly done. They've got to be careful with their selection, and it's also a picture of the lamb to come. Obviously, a male of the first year, you shall take it out from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it up until the 14th day of the same month. And the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening. And they shall take of the blood and strike it on the two side posts and on the upper door of the post of the houses wherein they shall eat it. And they shall eat the flesh in that night, roast with fire and unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. So very specific. So he's going ahead and telling them, and he'll give them a little more detail in this, I believe, a little bit later on. But you're going to take blood from that lamb, and it's going to be you're going to strike it on the two side posts and the upper door post of the houses, and of your each respective houses, and you're going to eat it inside that house, and you're going to eat all of its flesh that night. You're going to roast it with fire, and he's going to say here in a moment, whatever remains, it's going to be burned with fire. He also notes specifically unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Eat not of it raw, nor sodden at all with water, but roast with fire, his head with his legs and the purtenance thereof, and you shall let nothing of it remain until the morning, and that which remaineth of it until the morning you shall burn with fire. And thus shall you eat it, with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. Um, so that night, they were required to eat of it in that fashion, because they were to be ready at any moment for God to say, "We're leaving. It's time. We're going." And then this would also set in order the way that they would remember this occasion year after year, that they would follow, that they were to follow this practice for this. Certainly, and we can dig into this a little more in the future, but certainly there are roots here, and the foundation laid for the memorial that Jesus would institute with his disciples, that being the Lord's Supper, which would be partaken of every week. And in it, you find that we partake of this. As often as we partake of it, Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, we do show forth his death until he comes. And so we're always ready. The idea of the Passover, they were to be ready on that night, and when they would remember it, they would remember it in that fashion, that on that night they had to eat it in haste and be ready. Well, there is a lesson there for us as Christians, that when we remember in taking of the Lord's Supper, that we're showing forth his death until he comes, that it's a looking forward to his coming, and to always be ready for his coming. What questions or comments? He says in verse 12, "For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment." There's that line that we continue to refer back to as we discussed the various gods of Egypt, that God was showing his power over them. And he reminds them here, I am the Lord. I am Yahweh. I am the one true God of heaven. "And the blood shall be to you for a token, a sign, upon the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you, and when I smite the land of Egypt." And so he says, this is going to be the sign, the signal that you place outside your house, if you will. The flag that you're going to fly, it's going to be the blood that is on the doorpost and above your door. And so that you have done it according to God, what God has said. On that night, I will pass over you. And ever since I've read verse 13 today, I could not help but have the song in my mind that we sometimes sing. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. "And the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you, when I smite the land of Egypt." You know, today, when the subject of baptism is brought up, and it's quite, sometimes it seems amazing, but it's not really amazing when you consider the influence that Satan has and the deception that he is able to cause. But it seems amazing sometimes how simple the commands are for one to be baptized in order to be saved, and yet how many are obstinate and just very very objective to the command that God has given to be baptized. And every other aspect of becoming a Christian, they would not argue with those things. Most likely, most would not argue with them. But when it comes to baptism, you're trying to earn your salvation. You're trying to work to get into heaven. And it's interesting, among the things that are required of us in order to become a Christian, that's the one thing that's being done to us. Now we have to subject ourselves to it, and we need to understand what's taking place. But that's the one thing among the plan of salvation that's being done to us. We are submitting ourselves to that. And so among those, it would be the lowest on the totem pole of things that require work, if that, in other words. But with the one argument that they make is, if we require baptism, then we make the cross of Christ of less effect. We make it of no effect, or we cheapen the sacrifice of Jesus when we turn the focus on us. Again, all of those things having false notions and false foundations, because we understand we're trying to follow what God says and just do what he says. What if on this occasion, when Moses instructs them what God has said, and they said, "Wait a minute now. The lamb has already been slain. I'm not doing anything else. I'm not putting the blood on my doorpost. I'm not going to eat this." And in essence, you think about it, that's what people are doing today with the commands of Christ. In that they're saying the lamb is already slain, the sacrifice is already made. There's nothing else that I need to do. And unfortunately, those who make that decision will not have the blood covering their doorposts. They will not eat of the memorial feast of the Lord's Supper in the way that the child of God does. So something that comes to my mind as we read through this, and I think about the folly of many in the religious world today. What questions or comments do you have?
I think they like to lower the bar.
That may be a part of it, but being immersed in water is not that hard, is it? I mean, it's a pretty simple thing in the grand scheme of things. Um, February 30th? No, I'm kidding. Uh, I I actually did come across something. Seems like our February 1st would be the first day of their Nissan or ABF, but don't take that to the bank. Um,
Don't you can believe AI says
of okay, I don't know where I'm getting mine from then. Of what I was thinking. Yeah, because it's close to what it's called Easter. So I'm not sure what I was reading that came up with that or the validity of what I've just said. So, what other questions or comments?
also they had to be in the house.
Yes, sir.
Blood on it.
Yes, sir.
One house not good as another house.
That's exactly right.
They got to be in the house with the blood on it.
That's right. That's right. A lot of um, pictures here of and parallels to the church and to Christ and to the requirements that God has for Christians.
Well, the other thing that you said, and I thought about this earlier, is none of these things were things that they couldn't do.
Right.
They could do it. Again, another parallel with our salvation. Salvation is something that simply can't do, we're not able to do, right? We have to just be willing to do it.
Right.
And if they were willing to do it, they would be saved.
That's right. You know, um, we'll bring this up and then we'll move on a little bit. In Mark 16 and verse 16, the argument is often made, if God required baptism, well, then he would have included in the latter part of that verse as well. Uh, he that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. He that believeth not shall be condemned. But uh, they say that, well, it should say that he that believeth not and is condemned or baptized not would be condemned if that's the requirement of God. Uh, negating, we've negated what the first part says, and negating the fact that we're trying not to be condemned. We're trying to be saved. The reality is that baptism is one of those things that it is a test of our faith. That are we truly believing what God says? Do we believe what He says enough to do what He says? And so, if we are not willing to be baptized, then we don't have faith. And so that second part is very much reflective of that. that if we do not believe, then we are condemned.
Buried and coming up
That's
to a
right.
new life. So if you're never buried, you don't do away with the sin that was in your life.
That's right.
I think it's almost like a problem. It's not even necessarily that they believe that baptism is required, because they use it as a scapegoat for other things. Because if they were to take the whole thing at face value and just believe it, well, then they can't do this, they can't do that. I think baptism is more just one of the things.
It's it's unfortunate that and it's very prevalent. Oftentimes, if you get to this subject with someone that claims to be a Christian or to follow Christianity, it's going to be a point of conflict oftentimes. But if they have an honest heart and they're willing to consider what the Bible says, it's plain and simple, and it's there in the scriptures for them to read. You think about Romans 6:3 and 4, and going back to that example of how many will make the argument that we essentially cheapen the sacrifice of Christ by requiring baptism. Of course, they're putting the argument that we are doing this when we know that it's the Bible. This is what God requires. We're not cheapening the sacrifice. We're enacting the sacrifice. We are uh, going back to the power of the sacrifice and burial and resurrection of Jesus, which is what they were doing here, obeying God, doing what God says very simply. Although that for their situation, it was not necessarily an easy thing to do. Becoming a Christian is not an easy thing to do, and entering the Christian life is not an easy thing to do. While the steps are simple in that regard, it does not mean that it's easy. But the easiest part is being baptized.
Think about it also. They all practice on the baptism.
Yeah,
They call it. So it's not so much they're opposed to baptism, because you can't be in those denominations unless you're baptized into that denomination. Interesting thing itself. They say you're saved before, so if they practice immersion, they're burying a live man, which is odd.
right.
Be burying dead people, like Paul said, Romans 6, death, burial, and resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
We die for our sins, repentance, so we're baptized, burying, symbolizing that old man, raised to walk in newness of life. And I tell them at times, you can go to heaven without being baptized, which according to their doctrine you can. You cannot be a member of your church without being baptized. And it's easier to go to heaven than it is to be a member of your church.
That's right.
We're not earning anything. I think they've just been taught down through the years. They grow up believing that in some way we're teaching a merit salvation.
Right.
And maybe they just don't consider it. So they're running from that, and without really just digging in. You don't know what the Bible teaches until you sit down and see what the Bible actually says,
That's right.
rather than what somebody says.
Oftentimes, it's as you noted, it could be something that it's just what they've always been taught. Uh, they have not been taught that there are actually different types of works, biblically speaking, and oftentimes there's an emotional attachment that comes along with it because a family member uh, was not baptized or something along those lines. Oftentimes that they will stand against that. But as you would note, and others would note, that we simply have to take it back to the scriptures and um, and allow them to see it for themselves, and so that the argument is between them and God, not us. So God here is setting the Israelites apart from the Egyptians. He's giving them an opportunity and to be delivered from his wrath on that night when he would bring judgment against the firstborn in all of Egypt. And so you could call this a consecration, a setting apart, that there's a difference between Egypt and Israel here, which you can see as a picture even of the church, that the church is to be different from the world, set apart from the world. And he also is giving them a memorial as God's people to continue to look back to, which we also see in the church, that we have a memorial that we continue to follow week by week. And then he is delivering them from his wrath and the death of the firstborn. We are delivered from God's wrath in that sense as Christians. Interestingly, it was his firstborn that was the one who gave himself so that we would be delivered from his wrath. Thinking about Christ as our Passover, 2 Corinthians 5 in verse 7, Paul would use that verbiage, that terminology in reference to Christ. That Passover memorial was fulfilled by Christ, and Christ has given us a new memorial. In this, you see what I briefly noted last week, the choreography of God, that He is beautifully uh, putting together these things and putting them before the minds of His people and having them written down so that we can go back to them and we can see all of these ties and these pictures to the things that were His ultimate goal in the church and bringing about the Christ. And like the lamb that was slain, and that the lamb was to be without blemish, and that they were to be in the house, and that particular house had to have the blood of the lamb upon the doorpost. And the fact that this included a memorial, and that this was a memorial in the passing over of those who were in danger of the death on that night. He says, "This day," verse 14, "shall be unto you for a memorial, and you shall keep it a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. You shall keep it a feast by an ordinance forever. 7 days shall you eat unleavened bread. Even the first day you shall put away leaven out of your houses. For whosoever eateth leavened bread from the first day until the seventh day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. And in the first day there shall be an holy convocation, and in the seventh day there shall be an holy convocation to you. No manner of work, shall be done in them, save that which every man must eat, that only may be done of you. And you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for in this selfsame day have I brought you your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore shall you observe this day in your generations by an ordinance forever." And so forever there meaning until the end of the age, it indicating as long as you are under this law that I am giving, you're going to keep this feast. And he says that you're going to have to prepare and for this feast. He's already noted some of that preparation, but also he gives more specific instruction concerning the unleavened bread here. That 7 days that they were to be eating unleavened bread, that they were to purge leaven out of their houses. And this would become a picture also used for instruction, like in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, which is the context in which Paul would mention Christ as our, no, that's 2 Corinthians 5. But in 1 Corinthians 5, there's reference to purging out the leaven, and leaven being a picture there of sin. Now, there's nothing sinful in our physical world about using leaven unless we're putting it where God has forbidden it or He told us not to use it. And so here, there was nothing wrong with them having leaven until it came time for this feast that God has commanded for them. They were to purge it out of their houses, and they were to eat only unleavened bread. And so we have the foundation for the elements that Christ would use for His memorial, that He would establish. The bread that they would eat on that night with His disciples, His apostles, would be unleavened bread. And so now, following the memorial that He has set, each first day of the week, we are able to, and we are commanded to partake of unleavened bread. Furthermore, he indicates to them that the first day of this should be a holy convocation to them, and the seventh day it would be a holy convocation to them, and that they should not do work in either of those days, save that which every man must eat. That only must be done of you. And so there's work that they would have to do still, but not a servile work, not a work that it was for their own benefit, but it was simply for the carrying out of what God had commanded them to do. And so here he calls it the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which also would be the Passover. What questions or comments to this point? We're about out of time for tonight. We will pick up around verse 18, Lord willing, next week.